We should look at ways through that.
So there's no reason through the duplex rules that it doesn't necessarily apply to a new build. It could be a retrofit. The one, I suppose, barrier, and that's the same with the secondary independent dwelling units, which has been a barrier for everyone, is that it requires fire rating under the Building Act, and that's where a lot of people are put off. The other requirement is paying development contributions. But there is no reason through this rule framework. It does not require a new build. There is the potential to retrofit, as long as you meet the provisions, to be actually to provide for those, for 2 dwellings and existing 1 dwelling.
On the issue of limited appeal rights through that special process, you'll come back to us, I think I heard, because we need to understand how, are they, I mean, they still have appeal rights, they're just going to be condensed a bit, I imagine. Not.
So for us, I guess there's two parts to that. So we'll bring a report back to the next meeting, because if we're looking at that notification sort of March, April next year, and we're looking to potentially use the streamlined plan change process, we need to really use the next few months leading up to Christmas to the in-depth work and the detail needed with MFE to get that to the starting line and get that approved by the Minister. So we do need some clear direction before the elections. In terms of the appeal rights are gone entirely, except on points of law, so judicial review through the High Court, if I'm correct there, Jeanette. Yeah.
That's correct, but you remember you go through the full submission process, and you also you can go through the full hearing process with the panel, and there are other steps that you can implement that we can go through at the report, but that's things like having we can have mediation pre the hearings to try and talk through some of the issues that submitters have. So there's a number of steps that we can implement, even though we are taking out the appeal rights at the end of the process.
One more, if I may, I don't want to go sideways here, but, I'm sure the team is very busy with this work. But in the consultation the other day at Farm Street, it became apparent that, that's an area in the city that is ripe for rezoning as well. In fact, I mentioned to the Chief Executive when he was dealing with a very difficult chappie there who was opposed to everything going on, as soon as he realised there was the potential of rezoning in the future, whereas property values would recover, he changed his whole countenance. I made a mistake in the email to the Chief Executive and said it was when he said resigning and not rezoning. So don't worry, the Chief Executive's not resigning. But there is preliminary work that has to be done to even start that, which is with the hazards and stuff with Regional Council. Just wanting to get some indication of when we would be in a position to start that preliminary work on that area, not wait till 2024, because it is obvious around Farm Street with the expansion of the mall and so on that some of that land is where intensification is going to occur also.
So just to be clear around these plan changes, that they are city-wide plan changes, so they do cover all of the residential zones across the city, including around Bayfair and Arataki. As Janine mentioned, aside from the Te Papa Peninsula, we're only looking to apply the duplex and low-rise development provisions, but even the low-rise development provisions enable attached terraced housing type development, so quite intensive development. Now that is of course subject to the infrastructure capacity and natural hazards assessments. There is a preliminary natural hazard assessment underway for these plan changes, and that is nearing completion, and we were working with the Regional Council around that. So we're not quite sure what the outcome of that will be, whether in terms of geographically how much or if any of the coastal strip will be restricted, or there will be additional steps to step your way through to enable that type of building at this stage to happen. But our aim is to try and, if there are challenges that need to be stepped through to provide a pathway for landowners and developers to do that. So we can report that back as that emerges. I think going forward, The idea, and if you look at that kind of the spatial kind of mapping that we've done, it identifies lots of areas on the coastal strip as being very, I guess, appropriate for intensification if we can work our way through those other issues. So what we would be looking to do is undertake more work around natural hazards, and if we think we can overcome those issues, or they're not as significant as perhaps we think right now, that we would apply a similar exercise to the Papa spatial planning in terms of along that coastal strip in future, and perhaps even before the to feed into the city plan review process. So that's the idea. We certainly see it as a really good area to intensify if we can work our way through those issues, and the market really wants to be there. We know that. Yeah.
Right, thank you for that reply. I think Councillor Malloy, you still had a question?
Yeah, under the rollout, and we have had in the past a bit of difficulty in rolling this out to the community, or we've had some challenges. You know, it would be fair to say, isn't it, that, you know, under the GPS, under the government's requirements, this is a requirement to provide that capacity in the brownfield and or greenfield, but brownfield in particular. And if we don't do that intensification and the transport around that, we'll be pretty much left out in the cold when it comes to looking for funding, and we've already found that out. Would that be a reasonable assessment?
It's a very reasonable assessment. I mean, there's a lot of good reasons to promote intensification in our city, even putting that aside. But if we want to align ourselves high in the queue for government investment, we need to promote multimodal projects and intensification projects and try and put those two things together. So we need to be seen on working on those things alongside the other transport investments and greenfield projects that we need to deliver for our city. Yeah, we need more emphasis on this than we've had in the past, even if there is that degree of community angst and opposition, which I'm sure there will be pockets of that. We just need to work our way through those.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion just to extend our time because we're over 2 hours. I'll move it. Someone second it. Thank you. Councillor Morris. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. And question from Mayor Brownless.
Just wondering how we relate to Hamilton. I mean, it's a city of a similar size, so how do we relate to them as far as what you can and can't do on a typical housing area?
So at the moment, we're quite a lot more restrictive than what is enabled in Hamilton. Hamilton have a range of medium and high density areas in their plan, both in brownfield and greenfield areas, and they have these duplex provisions across their whole residential zone. So as you might remember, we did a bit of work with the with Becca, including Carl and Luco Dwyer, who was the previous planning manager at Hamilton. He's actually moved back there to take that job up again. And in terms of our city plan review and our intensification strategy, so a lot of what we're doing is picking up on what Hamilton are doing and what is being delivered quite successfully over there. Around areas like the hospital, the university, and just broadly in terms of duplex development across their suburban areas.
Just supplementary, if we happen to be over that way, would be worth a look. So I might ask you some areas that I can go in. It's just good to see what actually happens in other areas on the ground as opposed to in a plan, you know. Yeah.
Supplementary to that.
Yep.
Andy, as regards to the single dwelling on a single site, I think the site was 200. Is that 200 squares over there in comparison with what we're doing here?
So for the duplexes was 1 to 200. Yeah. So you need a 400 square metre site to deliver 2 duplexes.
Yeah.
Over there.
So what we're doing here is 325 still.
Correct. Yeah. That's what we're looking at. Yeah.
Why the difference so much?
I'll let Janine explain that, but there's good reason.
Look. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, part of this is we are working through a testing, so we are looking at whether we can achieve a duplex on a smaller site. What we've seen in Hamilton is it often moves to a single level duplex on a site. So we're also putting out a carrot there for people to move to, I guess, two-story dwellings. They can still achieve the outdoor space and so forth on that site, but we're still getting to a slightly smaller. And if we look at a lot of other examples beyond Hamilton, we can see areas where it's working fine and they're getting good outcomes.
I will move, and Councillor Morris will second. Thank you, Councillor Morris. A, B and C. I think we've had a very comprehensive report on it and good discussion around it. We've been on this track now for probably 2 years, maybe. And I don't think people outside of the hallowed halls here understand just how complex and how slow getting through these things can be. Certainly some of our partners don't understand that we're deadly serious about intensification and moving this along, but it just does not happen overnight. But I'm very pleased that we are making good progress and appreciate the hard work the staff put in on this. We had hoped to be notifying before the end of this triennium, but we will be seeing it occur early in the next, and that is a great way for those who are fortunate to be sitting in these chairs to begin their triennium with some real development opportunities in our city and provision of housing typologies, intensification, and I trust too, based on my questions, some retrofitting of some of our older housing stock that really doesn't need to be occupied by two people anymore and can provide housing for others. Any other speakers? Seconder, Councillor Morris.
Briefly, in terms of, I'll just chuck a couple of anchors out there, why not? In terms of the Te Papa plan changes, I think because there's amalgamation of titles required to get that higher density stuff, and it's a real long game, 50 years, that sort of thing, to get a significant change in the landscape. And so I wonder if streamlining that particular, that part of the plan change would be inappropriate, because not actually going to make it go any faster. The market's going to have to deliver it, and it's the amalgamation of those titles which is difficult. I think there's possibly an argument for having a streamlined process with the duplexes throughout the city, because I think Chair talked about if there's anything to declare an emergency on was transport, and this is of course the other one, housing. And Councillor Brown has been entertaining me this afternoon by showing me pictures of duplexes in Hamilton, and done well and in the right areas, it can go well. The other thing that, and Councillor Malloy referred to past experience in terms of consulting with the community on intensification, and the Chair picked up on it. One element that is so often missed in terms of council's communication with the community, and I don't necessarily know how to do it from a council officer and communication point of view, but the increase in property value of some people who, hitherto have only been able to have one dwelling on their site, and then, whoa, hang on a minute, all of a sudden subdividable. There's some real value uplift there, and it can certainly change people's perceptions of intensification. And so figuring out how to communicate that to the community is a positive, because it is a positive, as well as the downsides, I think is something that needs further consideration.
Other speakers? Councillor Robson.
Yeah, just a few observations. I'm broadly in favour of what's being proposed here, although I've got some concerns. Comment made about better design doesn't add cost. I don't agree with that. One of the classic situations you have, and orientation was suggested, is it changes your ability for site coverage, and you have to go back to sort of subdivision design, actually street layouts, to optimise the situation. I had a conversation a few years back with a developer and said you would help us enormously if you actually oriented the streets in a way that we could get the solar situation. that very rich and now knighted man had no interest in that topic for whatever reason. I think we need to be really, really clear around comms on B2, and the reason I say that is because there are people in our community who do feel they would like B2 in other parts of our city, not just into Papua Peninsula. So we need to explain for those people that want it why we're saying only to Papua at the moment, because there are places where there are people wanting to do this. That comms is really important. Brownfield, we don't have it. Unfortunately, we missed the Industrial Revolution, so we never got a large piece of dirt that turned out to be brownfield that we could actually redevelop. That means land is extraordinarily expensive, and in that sense, I'm very grateful to hear that you will be doing financial tests, because I think that's critical to this. The expectation that we have, the market won't fill it unless there's money in it for them. And so those financial tests, I think, are absolutely critical. I'm a little bit concerned about the duplex on 325 with the idea that perhaps we could reduce parking requirements. The classic situation is people will buy it and they'll park on street. We will get chaos, as we have in parts of Papamoa, where people are parking on the street because they have limited parking available on their site, but they also own 15 cars. The net result there is the streets are then dangerous, and worse than that, and I go back to my conversation with my operations director and the bus company, we wind up in situations where the bus companies can't get buses down the streets because we've not allocated sufficient parking on site. They're on the street, and when you try and remove it, all hell breaks loose. So I hope you're thinking ahead along all these dimensions. I'm sure you are. I'm just putting them down as markers, so later on as a resident, when I come and pitch in here on the LTP and complain about things, you know, this won't be one of them. With regard to uplift, great. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could tax some of it, again, like they do in civilised countries, to pay the salaries of our wonderful staff who are doing all this wonderful work, and I'm sure are not rewarded well enough for it.
Any other speakers? Brief right of reply, just to shed some hope for Councillor Morris. I think there are some potential places, and particularly in Gate Park, where accessible properties already own something like 1,148 properties, and I know on the corner of 21st Ave, right across from the school, they already own about 5 sections together, which they're ready to move on, but waiting for the changes to occur so it becomes a permitted activity. And I think you'll find that pepper potted all the way through Gate Park, and I think where necessary, with the new Kāinga, I think it's Kāinga Ora, they ultimately going to have powers of acquisition. That's where we see this aggregation of sites to make it really work. Unfortunately, we made a real mistake in the 80s and 90s, I think, with the infill through there. Not we, of course, we weren't here, but you know, that's my old neighbourhood, and you just see those quarter-acre sites that could have been developed really well now with 3 houses on them, and that's increased value on the site, which makes it more difficult to aggregate. But I believe it'll happen, and I think it'll happen sooner than what some have said, that once the rules are permissive, I think we'll see it going on. And but the concerns raised by Councillor Robson are valid, that we don't forget about parking and so on. Some of those streets in there are quite wide, and we need to be careful with how we allocate it, but buses don't have to go up and down them. They just need to walk a distance to the main corridor. But look, all good. I'll end there. Put the motion. All those in favour, A, B and C, please say aye. Against? That is carried.
Abstain.
Abstained.
Thank you.
Councillor Stewart. And we will now take a break. I believe there may be some sustenance awaiting us.
Shortly, it should be arriving in about 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Well, we need that just for a bathroom stop and so on. I suggest we reconvene at, what do you think, 6:30 or 6:15? Prefer 6:15?
Now, I've ordered hopefully enough for staff as well, so I was going to propose that if we do it in the staff
Oh, yes, let's all join together.
cafe, so then there's probably space rather than putting some in your lounge. And
Okay, we'll go over there. Our thanks to Janine and Andy and Carl and Ave, who may have already gone, but thank you for that presentation. And now Yeah, we'll just adjourn, we'll go into confidential when we come back.